I was a kid, around 9 or 10. My dad got a really high-paying job that forced us to move from middle-of-nowhere Pennsylvania to Brookmont, Maryland. I say forced, but that's probably not the best way to describe what happened. In reality, my parents were thrilled to make the move. It was a decision they barely thought about. In the span of about a month, we went from this tiny, rundown house in a relatively low-income area to a massive property in one of Maryland's nicest suburbs. You might be wondering how I felt about the whole thing. At that age, I was a pretty antisocial kid and mostly kept to myself, so it's not like I was leaving any lifelong friends behind. I didn't really have any to begin with. Years later, my parents would tell me that the prospect of giving me a fresh start was one of the reasons they were so willing to uproot our entire lives, but that's neither here nor there. The move didn't bother me much, and I was able to adjust pretty quickly. It's not like adjusting was very difficult given the circumstances, though. Like I said, the house was huge, and even my 10-year-old self could pick up on the fact that we wouldn't be struggling to make ends meet anymore. I'm not going to bore you about the pointless details about the inside of the house. I'll only tell you what you need to know. I had 2 older brothers, Sean and Harold. The backyard was easily our favorite part. It had a big plot of twisting hedges that made for perfect games of hide and seek, tag, or whatever else we came up with. But the best feature by far was the treehouse at the right edge of the property. Each house on the block was separated by a decently large cluster of tall trees, and the treehouse was situated directly within that patch. I say treehouse, but it was more like a tree castle. It wasn't your dad's run-of-the-mill weekend project. It was massive, spanning 6 or 7 adjacent trees. It had 3 different levels and an actual staircase built into it, not those flimsy planks you're probably used to seeing. It was obvious a professional had built it. For a while, my brothers and I played in the treehouse every day. It was always the highlight of our day. But eventually, my brothers got bored of the treehouse. They were older and in that awful teenage phase where nothing was cool anymore. Eventually, I was the only one who played up there, which kind of sucked. I was really torn up about basically being abandoned up there, but my brothers refused to come back no matter what I said. One day, I climbed up into the treehouse and found a folded piece of paper sitting in the corner. To this day, I still remember the exact words written on that first note. It said, "Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" I was the happiest kid alive. I assumed it was one of my brothers playing a game with me, so I played along, hoping to re-interest them in the treehouse. There was a stack of paper in the treehouse that hadn't been there before, so I eagerly picked up one of the markers we had in there and wrote back, leaving a little note with my name. I placed it where I had found the first one, excited to play this new game. That night, I wanted to ask my brothers which of them was the Marshmallow Man, but I was afraid they'd stop playing if I said anything, so I kept quiet. For the next few days, I'd come home from school and run straight to the treehouse. Each time, there'd be another note waiting for me. At first, the notes were innocent and sounded exactly like stuff my brothers would say. I was having a lot of fun with it, but as the days went on, the notes got stranger. The Marshmallow Man started asking me increasingly personal questions that I didn't fully understand. Things that didn't make sense for my brothers to ask, like, what's your favorite time of day to play outside? Or what do you usually eat for breakfast? I don't remember every question he asked, but one of them that will always stick with me was, which window in the house is your bedroom? I look back at that exact question and literally feel sick to my stomach. At the time, I still didn't think too much of it. I assumed it was still one of my brothers, so I answered every question without hesitation. But the next note was so unsettling that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. It was something like, "What do your pajamas smell like?" or something nasty along those lines. I stormed inside and confronted my brothers, demanding to know which of them was behind the notes. They both started laughing at me and denied it. Both of them swore there was no such thing as the Marshmallow Man and started making fun of me for still playing make-believe. I started crying and ran out of the room. I remember being a mixture of sad and angry. I knew one of them had to be lying. Instead of going to my parents, I hatched a plan to catch them in the act. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard tapping at my window. I froze, feeling my heart start to beat out of my chest. I was already scared of the dark to begin with, so the tapping added a layer of fear that I couldn't deal with. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I pulled back the window curtains and almost screamed. Taped to the outside of my window were dozens of marshmallows. It had to be my brother's. I was so angry. This wasn't funny anymore. I decided I'd catch them red-handed the next night. I pretended like I hadn't noticed the marshmallows and didn't say a thing to either of them all day. Later that night, I was ready. When the tapping started again, I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtains open, ready to yell at them. But it wasn't my brothers. On the other side of the glass was a man, an old, disgusting man with yellow eyes and what looked like rotting teeth. He had patchy hair on his head and smiled at me when he noticed me looking. I don't think I've ever screamed louder in my life. I felt like I was gonna die in that moment. My parents came running, but by the time they got to my room, the man was gone. It was a huge thing. The police searched the property, combing through every inch of the yard and treehouse, but they didn't find anything. They even checked the surrounding area, but that man was never found. Some of our neighbors came outside to see what was going on and reacted in horror when my parents filled them in. I told the police and my parents everything I knew, but there wasn't much I could even say. They took the notes in as evidence, but I doubt they really did anything with them. That man never came back. My parents told me to never play in the treehouse again, but it's not like I wanted to after that incident anyway. I moved out of that house a while ago, but my parents still live there, and I always take an extra long look at the treehouse whenever I'm back. This remains one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me.